You could be a student from a hybrid or remote situation who's doing okay recovering and would still be eligible for these. And maybe most important that I keep coming back to is to say, nothing also requires that these programs would serve the students with the highest degree of need. And I tried to keep coming back and saying, I believe the fundamental problem that we have in public education is these programs would make it easy for the less needy student, the more marginal student, or the student who's doing fine to exit the system. The highest need kids are the ones left. And the more that becomes true, the harder it is to keep other kids because they see possible deterioration in the system. So while on the surface, these sound, of course, good for kids who are not doing well or for parents who are dissatisfied, I think we have to come back to saying, what is the impact going to be on the whole system, on the kids who aren't anyone's, the choice of schools who can do this. So when we try to have these conversations with legislators, or if you get questions from the media, I think these are the kind of things we need to come back to. It's not, and I made this point, and again, I'm waiting to maybe have time for question or reaction. This is not about saying the private schools are deliberately cherry picking kids or not wanting to serve kids or overtly trying to discriminate. It's simply the fact that private schools tend to be limited in what they can do, or part of their mission is going to be more limited. And by that definition, it runs the risk of creating this kind of two-tier system that we worry about. Is my sound still okay, guys? I know
it's okay. We can hear you have people in the background, but
okay. If you can still hear me, that's okay. So there's a few more things I can probably talk about, but let me pause to see whether, certainly if there's questions, or whether Scott or Leah or Austin or anyone wants to bring anything else. Scott, I did use the example of the school that is able to social distance because it controls its enrollment. Might want to talk about that as an example of the kind of issues we're dealing with.
Sure, Mark, and I find it very appropriate that you're in the basement of the State House on Kansas Day.
Hey, before you go farther, you know what else this pandemic means? No giant Kansas birthday cake.
Oh yeah,
Which
yeah,
is one of the highlights of every year.
No sing along of Home on the Range. I've been humming Home on the Range all day.
Nothing like that. I look forward every year to my Kansas birthday cake and not getting
that. But what Mark was talking about was, it seems like not a lot, but some legislators are kind of beating up on schools for going into remote or hybrid learning situations. And they say, well, these private schools are open. Why are the public schools closed? And so there was an interesting story in the Capital Topeka paper this week, and they were talking to a private Catholic school in Manhattan. And just kind of offhandedly, it was mentioned that the school was getting a lot of interest from parents wanting their kids to go to school because they were concerned about remote or hybrid. And the school, in order to socially distance appropriately, was simply putting these kids on a waiting list. Well, public schools can't do that. So, I mean, I think it's another issue to be aware of. And I just wanted to kind of, Leah and Mark have been talking about the bills that are going to be voted on next week. And 2068 is the tuition tax credit, the big expansion of the tuition tax credit program. And I think it's fair to say that the votes are on the committee to get this out of committee. But importantly, next week, that committee, the House K through 12 Education Budget Committee, is holding an informational briefing on Wednesday that is going to focus on remote and hybrid learning. And so we at KASB later today, we're going to try to send out some information about that. And we really would like school board members to contact the committee members to tell them those that have done hybrid or remote learning, what went into the decisions, why did they make these decisions, what kind of things are they doing to make sure these kids are getting the services that they need, even if they are in a hybrid situation. Because I think the committee is rounding up a lot of comment that is going to be folks venting their frustration. And we get that, you know, we're all frustrated. But I think the committee members need to hear from our board members the other side of those issues, that, you know, we're making these decisions because of the pandemic. I mean, it's not like we want to make these decisions, but we have to. So we'll be sending out information later today specifically to ask board members to provide information on their hybrid and remote, the decision makings that went into that and what they are doing to make sure continuous learning is appropriate and enhanced later when hopefully we ever get back to normal. So I just wanted to kind of throw that in there.
And we are starting to get a few questions in the chat. And we'll start with Chris's prompt here for a bit of conversation around accountability and the difference in accountability between private schools and public schools, and how we make sure that the state funding is going to schools who are hitting the metrics that public schools are expected to hit themselves. So what are the differences in those accountability metrics, and would these bills have any impact on those?
Well, I can start because I spent a lot of time reading the bills. So here's what's a little confusing. One thing to keep in mind: House Bill 2068 and Senate Bill 61 amend a current program. 2119 creates a new program. The current program, the tax credit scholarship, requires participating schools to be accredited by the state or accredited by a national or regional accrediting body approved by the state board for the purpose of teacher licensure. So that means that you can be an accredited school, a private school, accredited under this program, but not by the state board, which means you would not have to do state assessments, you would not have to provide that kind of data. That's a big difference, and that is not changed by the bill. We think that's one thing that might be debated. The broader bill, the Education Savings Account Bill 2119, does not require any accreditation at all. It would apply to any non-accredited, non-public school in Kansas, which also by definition includes homeschools. The only requirement is you have to register with the State Board of Education, which all private schools, including homeschools, are supposed to do now, and you have to teach the subjects that is required by state law of public schools and accredited schools. Of course, as we all know, public schools are teaching those subjects. The question is whether students are learning. Our accountability now is test results and other measures to see whether kids are actually learning. That wouldn't be required. So you can kind of think of a graduating scale from state accredited, which, for example, all the Catholic schools, the Lutheran schools, and a small number of other schools are state accredited. Non-state, but accredited by someone, which would be another route. Care Paravel in Topeka, for example, I went to their website. They say they're accredited by a national body, but it's not the state, so they might qualify. And then there'd be schools that have no accreditation at all that would still be allowed, at least as the bill is introduced. Parents could set up a savings account and get base state aid per pupil into an account to, frankly, pay themselves tuition or this school without any further accountability. Missing anything, guys?
No, you covered it.
And Ma also has a comment, goes back to that same thing. So here's another issue that we found when we looked at this. Well, overall, private schools in aggregate have better test scores in terms of like average results. There's a lot of variation among private school results, as is true of public schools, But when you look at kind of more comparable demographics, those differences are not nearly as great. What you tend to see is that school districts that have less poverty have high average results. Districts with lots of poverty have low average results. Low poverty districts, like the private schools, still have gaps between low income and higher income kids. And so, when you equalize those out, you don't see the dramatic differences that might be suggested if you just looked at overall numbers. And so that's a level of detail that a lot of people don't want to get into, but it is important to remember. And we're going to try to have some information and research out on that. The other thing I'll say while I have the floor is we also have some research that we're going to look at where we've looked at the 10 states that have the most kids in these types of programs and looked at like their NAEP results and their graduation rates and college attainment and those sorts of things. And we found that the average of those 10 states, Kansas is performing better on most of those measures than the states that have these programs. And we further looked and found that our low income rate is actually slightly higher than the average of these 10. So it isn't just that we've got easy kids and these other states don't. That's an example. Now I'm going to say they also aren't doing dramatically worse, but they're not doing as well yet. So the idea that moving kids into private schools helps your results or would help Kansas results just doesn't seem to really be borne out.
If there's any other comments on that, we'll certainly be open to them. But Lou asked a question here in the chat about constitutionality of bills like this. And maybe we'll start with you, Leah. How much of that question has been answered at the federal level by cases like Espinoza, and how much of that might still be up in the air?
Yeah, the Espinoza case was decided in June or July over the summer, and too long, didn't read. The short version of it is that the program that Kansas has, which is very similar to the Montana one that was at stake, but the program that Kansas has is constitutional. That's the short story. So I don't think we need to spend any time talking about, in your testimony that this isn't even constitutional, and you're probably going to run afoul of the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court, in its ruling over the summer in the Espinoza case, took that argument away from us. So I would not spend a whole lot of time on that. I agree with Lou. I think as far as the pure constitutionality and the way our state constitution sets up the structure for public education, I agree. In my perfect world, it's not cool. But the Supreme Court, didn't do us any favors over the summer. And so I think, unfortunately, we're just going to have to take another tack in our testimony.
But I do think that the tack that some of you are suggesting on accountability
Yes.
is an important one. And another issue that I had a conversation about yesterday from an attorney who I'll leave nameless for now, unless he's on and outs himself and I don't see him, is I think whether it would actually raise a state constitutional question or not, 2119 would be really direct state appropriations into accounts that would go to schools who are not, if you're not accredited, you are not in any way supervised by the State Board of Education. And the Constitution does say the State Board of Education is to have general supervision. Now,
that's correct.
General supervision of public schools, well, these aren't public schools, so it is a debatable point in some ways. But I do think the question of, under our system, where there's a state obligation for education, and we have a specific role for the state board, a specific role for local boards, and a specific role of the legislature, for the legislature to take money outside of that system does raise questions. And again, these are not my original arguments. So, but I think they are things that are definitely worth thinking about and discussing with your legislators as you go forward.
There was a question from Lou in the chat. If a student or their family gets the prior year base state aid for the education savings account, do you get to count them in your FTE for that year? I don't know if the bill goes into that level of detail.
Well, it's a good question, and probably only you that are really wrapped up in the school finance formula will appreciate this. Our understanding is that how the bill works is if a child took one of the savings accounts, they would get the base state aid amount, but it doesn't change how the formula allows you to use the prior or second prior year for your enrollment. So while you would likely eventually lose those dollars, you would not, as the bill is now, if the student was in your district over the past 2 years, you could theoretically count them because you're using that enrollment. It also seems to provide that because only the base aid is taken, the bill directs that the amount that that student would have provided in weightings would stay with the district for up to 3 years. So there does appear to still be a kind of a phase out, but this also adds to the cost to the state, because if the state is going to have to be putting this base state amount in the savings account, but you're still claiming for a year or two that child in the weightings, that would appear to really add to the cost of the program. And whether that's the intention, whether that's the way the bill would actually end up, we're not entirely sure. And then there's a question, they say what the cost of the state would be. We have not seen a fiscal note, and for the reasons I'm talking about, I think it would be very hard to calculate, because unless, I mean, someone will have to make a guess as to how many kids would participate, and it would only be a guess because, as I say, under the bill, if the bill went immediately into effect, virtually every child in the state could participate. Don't know whether they would. So we're going to have to make some assumptions. And then the other issue that has been brought up is the administrative costs of setting up this program within the state treasurer's office and other places. So whereas the scholarship bill is designed and claimed to be revenue neutral or revenue saving, at least in the short term, this bill would appear to be much more expensive.
We'll keep watching the chat for any more questions on those two bills. Scott briefly mentioned the informational briefing in House K-12 on Wednesday. Mark, Leah, any more to add to what that's going to look like, what members should be doing heading into Wednesday and even during that hearing on Wednesday afternoon?
Well, what we're hearing as of now is that Craig Nuenswander of the State Department of Education is the person who's going to be giving the briefing. But what we also are hearing is that written testimony will be accepted. Now, that's the official information from the committee chair and the committee assistant. What we're also hearing and seeing on other channels on social media is that there is an active effort underway to solicit testimony, particularly from folks who are upset. And that includes all of us. As we've already said, none of us love the way this school year has rolled out, but this is probably designed to be kind of a venting session about, the struggles of hybrid or remote learning and not being able to play sports or doing other things that we all understand are very important. So what we're going to need to do is, at the very least, submit written testimony from board members, from superintendents. Here's why we went to hybrid. Here's why we went to remote. Here's why we go back and forth. Here's why we started in person and now we're remote, whatever those efforts are. But we would like to ask you to be prepared then to get some folks who would be willing to testify in person. And that doesn't have to be in person at the Germany State Capitol. As Mark is wearing a mask there, they're accepting remote testimony. You could do it just like we're doing now. So I said, as we know right now, it's written testimony only, but it seems that things are in flux with this hearing and plans may change or let's just say plans may change. And so we'd like to encourage you to right away, as soon as you can, start working on that written testimony and get that in. But that we would like to be able to have some people kind of on deck, on the bench to testify either in person or via Zoom, or it's WebEx this year in the state capitol about, you wouldn't have to read that testimony, just kind of summarize. I'm Leah Fleiter from Manhattan Ogden USD 383. Here's what we did. Here's why. Happy to talk about it. It's because, we want to be prepared, because it's certainly appropriate for people to vent, but it's also appropriate for us to be able to present our side of why this school year rolled out the way it is. I think it's probably surprising to most of us on this call, but, there's a narrative out there, and quite a few people believe it, that, no schools have opened up in person, that all public schools are remote, and that, none of the private schools are. So that's what we'd like to get you prepared for, is to definitely submit the written, and then be prepared to have some folks testify either in person or electronically. Did I cover everything, Scott and Mark?
I'm gonna play on their guilt a little bit. You guys, many of you, I see you tune in every week. You must feel you're getting something out of this. So here's our request for you. If everyone here can pledge that you are going to submit written testimony and speak on it if possible, but simply a statement on behalf of your district, and find a friend in another district who's willing to do the same thing. That's all we ask, a one-page statement that says, here's what we're doing in our district, and get someone else, that would give and I'm also talking to you people who are watching this not live, who are seeing it over the weekend. You can do that. That'll help ensure that we're putting on the record a cross-section of truly what's going on across Kansas and why. And that would be immensely helpful both on this issue and beyond.
Just how important is weighing in on that overall narrative that's being told right now to public education? I mean, it's kind of easy to shrug your shoulders at a venting session and say, let them vent. But how important is it for our folks to get involved in that narrative, not just for next week, but long-term impacts throughout the session this year?
Particularly this year, Austin, it's important because we have, especially on those two committees, House K-12 and Senate Ed, we have some new legislators. I mean, they are brand new. And, those of us on this call who are school board members or former school board members, when you first get on a board or in the legislature, if you have some issue that's sort of popping or is hot, you tend to, your first instinct as a newbie is a bit, wow, I got 35 emails that told me to vote yes on this bill, and I only got 10 to vote no. Okay, I guess I'm going to vote yes. They don't know you all. They don't know. You might be surprised, but, your state senators don't know all of the superintendents in their legislative district yet, if they're new. House members, same. And so they're and I think, Ann Ma has worked in state legislative offices. She knows how that email comes in. And we really need to be able to have a wide representation of the facts coming in, because when you have a bunch of people weighing in who are only saying, it's terrible, my kid didn't get to do this or that. And by the way, if you close schools, I will guarantee you, I will eat this KASB cup live on our next Zoom if there is not a Johnson County doctor on Wednesday night who's going to talk loud and long about teen suicide rates. Ann Ma's shaking her head. She knows what I'm talking about. I will eat this next Friday if that does not happen. So you just need to be aware of that, and to understand that there is a narrative out there that either we're all closed, or we don't care, or we're not doing enough. And there's a lot of people who are just new to the legislature. They just had to vote on an abortion amendment. They're getting whipsawed every day with information. It's like drinking from a fire hose. And so we are going to have to be responsible for telling our story, because even though we think they should know, they don't. They just don't.
Mark, Scott, anything to add to that?
Well, the only thing I would add is Leah, you had an apple behind you. You could have used that.
Oh yeah, I didn't want. No, it's a little more dramatic if I offered to eat a metal cup.
Yeah, we'll sell tickets to that show.
Well, and you know, I guess that what we're asking you to do is, I don't think there's a football game this weekend. So there is some time to compose a short email to members of the House K-12 committee. And this is just something, this will help prepare us to just develop these long-term relationships with these legislators so that, oh, so-and-so from school district X is contacting me. I haven't, you know, just, it'll help develop those long-term relationships that, you know, we all need to develop with legislators.
Anne's raising her hand.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask a question. I noticed there's only 20 some people on the call today, and I have 29 school districts in my board district. So I would like to send a note out to them saying, call to action, here's what you need to do. And I've been taking notes fast and furious, but I want to get it right. Could you guys send something out about, here's how you ask board members and superintendents to participate, and that they could then forward to their other friends in other districts as well?
Yeah, that's exactly what we're going to do this afternoon.
Is that going to be on your website this afternoon?
I think we're going to send it out as an email. Is that right?
That's the plan, but we can certainly post those as resources on our website. You know, we're willing to do just about anything we can to make sure that it's as people as possible.
And we'll make sure you get the email, Anne.
Yeah,
and also
I get those, but
yeah.
Okay.
In that email, we're gonna ask people if you need help. You know, we realize a lot of people haven't done this before. I'll be the contact, and I can help people. Okay, so you know, we'll have my contact information. They can email me. They can call me. You know, as I like to say, I'm an empty nester. I don't have anything else to do with my weekend. I am happy to help people. You know, so I'm happy to help coordinate that effort, especially for folks who haven't really participated in this kind of thing before.
Well, I usually take an afternoon nap every day, but I'm going to
Yeah, I'll turn my phone off for a little bit, but yeah, I'm with you there, Anne.
Well, I mean, if we had something like that, then I could forward it to all the other state board members too and say, reach out to your boards. And so we get something from all across the state, because that is important. Thank you.
Sure.
And I do want to pick up on a couple things there that people have said. A lot of new legislators have not yet built relationships. This is a great time to do that. In fact, we've been contacted by a state senator specifically asking for the phone numbers and contact informations of the superintendents, because she intends to contact every one of them to try to talk about this. That does two things. It's a great way to get information out on this, but it's a great way to build that relationship. And I guess here's the point, some lobby 101 that probably doesn't need to be said, but I will: be respectful, understand where they're coming from, talk about where you're coming from, promise to get information that they need, because they're hearing from very angry people. If you're just another angry person, that may not help. So you need to get your point of view across, but you need to be, particularly as a school leader, saying, we want to work with you for the next 2 or 4 or however many years it is. So we may agree or disagree on this, but please reach out to us, see us as a resource. We want to provide you trustworthy information. And that's really good. So this does give a good example to do some building relationships with those new people that Leah talked about. But you have to be willing to kind of meet them halfway, have to build a working relationship. I think the same thing is true. What a lot of the conferees tried to do is stress on these choice bills. Talk about the relationship you have with private schools in your area or homeschool parents. What are you already doing to meet the needs of their kids? Or to many places we hear about partnerships that are very positive. So those are important things that you can stress as well as you're telling this story.
Yeah. To Anne's point, we do plan on sending out another action alert this afternoon, specifically geared to Wednesday's informational briefing. We've been sending out resources throughout the week, trying to equip you with the tools and access that you need to be able to reach out to your legislator. It does matter, and being heard and telling our side of the story does matter greatly. So we try to make it as simple and easy as possible, and hope you can help us get the word across and push here in the legislative session. we'll continue to keep our eyes on the chat, but we do have another series of bills that we're watching that aren't tied to vouchers. So Mark, Leah, Scott, what else is being worked on in the legislature?
Does anyone have the list?
I know I had it in front of me and I started, promising to eat metal cups, and now I have to go look for it again.
I have the list, so I can lob them out there and let you.
Okay, go for it.
House Bill 2016 dealing with the age for tobacco usage. What are we seeing there?
Yeah, Leah, you're going to testify on that.
Yeah,
So.
We are going to testify in favor of that bill with a note that we are in favor of regulating vaping under the Indoor Clean Air Act, which applies to schools as well. That that's what prohibits smoking inside a school building. What we will point out is that we support that part of it. We're just going to note that our members don't have a specific policy position on smoking ages, 18 to 21. We don't have a position on that, so we're not going to speak to that part of the bill. But our position will be, yeah, we agree, vaping indoors is not a good thing at school, and and stay away from the age limit, because there's a broad reaction from our districts about whether we should be getting into that age issue or not.
Senate Bill 51, the foster care report card as statute. If I'm correct, that's been an executive order from the governor's office, but trying to make that permanent in state statute.
We are going to testify in favor of that based on a position that our members took, talking about, I think most people have become more and more aware of the real crisis in many ways that our foster system has had. People are trying to work to improvement, but we know that foster care kids tend to lag far behind their peers. And part of that is unfortunately a facet of the system. We've got an ex-superintendent who says, as a superintendent, she loved local control, but local control is the enemy of a kid who's being moved from place to place and district to district. And so we've got to find ways to meet the needs of those kids. This simply puts kind of some reporting, and the reporting, again, we're not going to look very good. But I think rather than trying to pretend the data doesn't exist, let's acknowledge the problems and figure out how we can do better. So that's the position we're going to take on that.
Senate Bill 62 targets vision screenings, particularly how schools are involved in that process.
There's a current law, or Leah, do you want to handle that?
No, go ahead, Mark. Go ahead.
Well, there's a current law, many of you probably know. One of those other things we have our public school system do is provide vision screening. This has been the case for decades. This bill, as we see it, is really just sort of an updating and a little bit of modernization, but it would also create an ongoing commission to look at this issue. So under a general position, our members adopted around the need to, well, again, help kids learn. And it's hard to learn if you can't read. It's hard to read if you can't see or aren't getting treatment. And so we think this is just, again, kind of brings up, modernizes what we're already doing, hopefully helps us do better. So we're going to be in favor of that one as well.
And House Bill 2115, which makes some adjustments to the oversight in the child welfare system.
This also came out of an interim committee. It would make a permanent kind of a state oversight group for the foster care system. Again, probably just in writing, but we're going to again acknowledge this is an area of concern. We're glad the state is taking a look at that.
And finally on my list, House Bill 2039, which would require students to pass a civics test in order to graduate high school.
Yeah, we're going to be opposing that. I'll be presenting that testimony. It's not that we don't think civics are important, but as I would imagine pretty much everybody on this Zoom knows, Kansas students are already required to pass a high school, U.S. government, or I'm sorry, I'm not coming up with the correct name, but you all know that your high school students have to take that. It's a graduation requirement. And so it's not that they're not getting any civics education or they're not getting content on it. This bill talks about a 100 question exam. It's kind of modeled on the U.S. citizenship exam. But anyway, what our tack is going to be is that we oppose this because this is really under the purview of the State Board of Education. They have, Anne's raising her hand, they have the constitutional authority over curriculum. And, the state board says, yeah, civics is important. We acknowledge that. But so our testimony against this bill is just going to be that students are already learning this. This would be redundant, and not to mention the big issue of the constitutional purview of the State Board of Education.
Although I'd love to say, I'm waiting for that bill they pass where we tell them to go stuff it and figure out who's in charge. So maybe that's it. We'll find out.
Yeah, this is a carryover bill, and the chairman of the House Education Committee, Steve Hubert, who began his public service as a school board member a long time ago. I've known him for many, many years. Really wants this. We'll see how the committee and the legislature ultimately react. I do think it is worth noting that our legislative committee did, in our priorities, identify a specific sort of KASB goal pathway about strengthening civic engagement, strengthening community involvement. Partnerships is one of the pillars of school redesign. So I think it's really important to stress, we're not saying all is well. We're really just kind of saying a state requirement of a new test is not the kind of broad approach that is probably going to change how we educate kids for their role in the community. That takes again, it really is part of school redesign that we have to embrace, and KSB wants to support that. The question is whether this type of narrow legislative approach is correct, and our members have said no, so it's pretty clear. But this is one of those things. Maybe I'm just smarting a little bit from one of my experiences this week when I'm asked why I and we are always Dr. No on everything, we oppose everything. And so we're kind of trying to say, because we oppose one thing doesn't mean that we don't agree. Maybe there's a problem or an issue. Question is, what's the best way to really solve the problem? And our point at this time is we don't think, but if the legislature can work with the state board and work with our local districts all together in a partnership to really address this, that's what we think will move learning in this area, not just, again, kind of requiring a test. At least that's what my members have told me, so I'm going to try to stick with that.
Don't worry, Mark. We don't think you're Dr. No. Not seeing any more questions in the chat, though we'll certainly hang around for just a little bit and see if you have more to ask. And no more bills on my list. Scott, Leah, Mark, anything to add as we wrap up this afternoon?
It looks like Ann Ma does, rather than chat, she just wants to ask it or state it. So that's
very good. I'll keep an eye out for raised hands too.
That Aaron's Law, is that going anywhere?
Oh, I don't remember the bill number, but it has not been scheduled for a hearing to this point, even though it was pre-filed. So while we'll watch it, have not heard anything on that. As you can probably relate to it, again, we just have to admit, there are some real advantages to a more remote legislative presence, but as we, between quarantining, COVIDing, security, and others, we're not at the Capitol as much. We don't necessarily hear all of the same things. But I've not heard any discussion of that to this point.
Okay, thanks.
Good. Any more questions or closing comments?
Turn in testimony and get a friend to do the same. We're going to be watching because we're going to know what testimony you in. So you need to do it. And if you want credit, you can tell us who your buddy is. But you've got to know someone who can do the same thing. So.
And I'm happy to help. So send people my way.
Mr. Tallman, please stop threatening our members.
That's Mr. Tallman's homework for the week. And next Friday, when we do this again, he's going to read out the list of people who didn't do it. And it'll be the Tallman shame hour.
Dr. Heim says that exercises in engagement are important. So this is actually a part of a self-improvement plan of mine.
It's good to see progress, Mr. Tallman. Good to see progress. Well, as we wrap up today, as always, our team is here to answer any questions you have, to be a resource in whatever way we can. So be sure to keep an eye on the KASB website. The newsroom is constantly, at this point, being filled up with updates in news Follow Mark, Scott, Leah, and KASB on social media. That's probably where you'll get quickest access to information. And Leah and Scott are getting very good at live tweeting committee meetings, and that's always a good way to spend an afternoon, watching them type away on their cell phones as committees are in action. And reach out to us if you need anything or if we can be a resource in any way. As always, we appreciate you giving us your time this afternoon, your continued efforts to advocate on behalf of public education in Kansas, and we will see you next